The thought was the Deepwater Horizon was going to destroy the Gulf of Mexico. When it turned out it wasn't quite like that. The Gulf is the third coast. The Gulf has not received the kind of research activity that the Atlantic and Pacific coast have.
The Gulf Research Program, $500 million, is coming from the settlement out of the BP oil spill. The courts awarded that money to the National Academies of Science, Engineering, Medicine in order to establish a science program.
In order to understand the Gulf, you need to understand the physical components, you need to understand the ecological components, and you need to understand the social and the human components. And you need to understand how they are going to interact and feed back among each other. We worked on a report on the long-term evolution of the coupled human and natural systems in the Gulf. We are in an era when things are going to change substantially. How do we study this system for the next 10 to 200 years? And what are the kinds of things that we need to look at? Doing that is going to involve a lot of science, and it's going to require a lot of computational and numerical models to understand how all of these systems evolve and change over a period of decades to even centuries.
Marshes are important habitats for species that people like to catch. Shrimp, blue crab, a number of fish species. Without those habitats, those species don't have somewhere for their little ones to grow up. We set out to ask the question, can we detect long-term trends in how marshes are doing in the northern Gulf of Mexico? And we used different data sets to look at both historical and future trends in what those marshes are likely to experience with sea level rise. Unfortunately, the long-term trend is that those marshes are going to disappear quite rapidly in the coming 70 to 100 years. The problem that Louisiana is facing today is the problem that Mississippi and Alabama will be facing in the near future.
We've had erosion of our coastal areas here in Alabama for several hundred years. One thing that you can do to try to protect these eroding shorelines is put out living shorelines that reduce the wave energy, causing the erosion of the sediments that hold the marshes together. There were 13 living shorelines that have been carried out in the state of Alabama. The project was trying to synthesize the information that had been gained from the different techniques. We did come to some conclusions, things that people had suspected all along. Among the materials you can use to build these living shorelines, oyster shell seems to be preferred. Our estimates that we could reduce shoreline erosion by around 30%, which if you're a property owner is important.
In this project, we're studying the efficacy of marsh terraces. Marsh terraces are segmented ridges of earthen berms that are constructed in open water areas of eroded marsh. It's designed to reduce wave energy. It's designed to reduce erosion of the adjacent marsh, preserve, sustain the marsh that's remaining, and in the process increase the habitat values for fish and waterfowl and other wildlife. Financial resources are obviously limited, despite the fact that we have billions of dollars coming to the Gulf Coast. It's still a finite amount, and it's really important for us to ensure that those resources are being spent wisely.
It's hard to know whether the restoration activities are working if you're not monitoring them. The report that was put together to advise people on the value of monitoring and to provide a number of techniques that would actually provide a blueprint for how one could go about monitoring the main kinds of habitats that were going to be restored in the Gulf of Mexico. You know, if we all do the same kind of thing, we're going to be able to understand what works and what doesn't work.
There is an increasing awareness that we're in the Anthropocene, that we're in the era in which the major processes on Earth's surface are driven by people.
People definitely do think changes are happening, that the events that are happening are of greater magnitude and are more destructive.
We can't sit back and just let the traditional mechanisms of science and science communication work. One of the goals of the Gulf Research Program is to get our information out into the hands of people that can use it as quickly as we can.
The time to get going on this is now. Things are changing fast now, and we really have to do some planning.